Hello and welcome to the Browns Blitz. Today is Tuesday, January 14th of 2020, and this is episode number 34. I'm your host, Rod Bloom. Very happy to be joined by Vince. Vince, I didn't verify how to say your last name.
That's okay, Calautti.
Calautti. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, nice. People like to stretch out.
I looked at it a while. Yeah. I think I've always read it as Calautti, and then I really looked at it tonight. So
it's very Italian.
Excellent. So Vince has been very patient. We've been talking for a while about Vince coming on the show as a guest, and finally doing it tonight. Vince actually lives the town over, but we're still doing it Skype-wise just because the schedules just worked out better. But Vince, it's really good to be talking to you tonight. How are things going for you?
Things are going pretty well. Excited to be on the show.
Yeah, well, we had a pretty big day today, which we're gonna dive into here in a minute for the Browns. So we've got quite a bit to talk about. But before we do that, let's start just by letting you give out your Twitter handle. It's always fun to interact with you on Twitter, so I'd like for some people to give you a follow if they could.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's my Twitter handle is my first name and last name at Vince Calautti, and that's if for those who are following you, if they're looking for me, I'm sure they can find it on mutual friends list on there. But it's Vince and then my last name Calautti. It's all just one thing on the Twitter handle.
Excellent. I'm going to bring back, it's been a couple weeks, and I'm going to bring back the Blitz Beverages segment tonight because I got some more beer for Christmas, and people bring beer to my house, and I need to drink some of it. So you know how it is. Mm-hmm. So for some reason, I have a reputation as a beer drinker now, even though, as I mentioned quite a bit on this show, I really don't drink a lot. I enjoy a couple beers now and then. I like having a variety of beer. So as a result, I have a refrigerator pretty much full of beer out in my garage because for the show, a lot of times I'll buy a 6-pack of beer. I'll drink one for the show, and then I'll have, several left over.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I'm going to talk about a beer here in a second. Vince?
Yeah. You
don't have a beer to drink. Are you drinking something else tonight?
I went with just water tonight. I used to do a weekly podcast back at my college. I went to Mount Union, and I used to do something called Raider Zone weekly, and we would do about an hour long. And so I know that my throat can get dry, so I just went with good old water tonight.
That's probably the second most popular beverage on the show.
Everyone wants to make sure they're not coughing or anything.
Yeah, it's a fine choice, and it's one I make quite often myself. So that's just fine. I'm drinking an Ellicottville Brewing Company Fall Festival beer. It's a 5.6% brew, and Ellicottville is out of New York. Let's see, Little Valley, New York. This is a beer my sister-in-law got me for Christmas in a 6-pack. So I got 3 fall festivals and 3 that are, I believe, a cherry chocolate beer, which I'm kind of saving for, a special occasion. I think it's a little higher alcohol percent, so I don't know. I'll probably drink that and then maybe give a report on one of the podcasts. But I'm really looking forward to that. But I wasn't prepared to dive into it tonight. This is a good beer. So it's got a good flavor. So to me, it's at the fall festival. I guess it's like an Oktoberfest. So it's got those similar type flavors. You can tell it's a quality brew. So I'm really enjoying it. So
that sounds good.
All right, so let's dive in.
All right.
Browns had a big day today. Let's just talk a little bit about, I guess, the press conference, kind of your impressions of that. First off, the Browns are pretty famous, their coaches, for winning the press conference. So what did you think today? Did you think we got another victory today, Vince?
I think so. Personally, I was listening to his press conference as he talked, and he sounded more confident as he went along. He reiterated a certain key points. One of them was moving forward, not really looking back at the past. I know that's tough for us Browns fans because we have such a we have such a importance of such a lens of looking back and comparing and contrasting and all of our past, I guess, issues we can say. And I think his big thing of like focusing on the here and now, even highlighting that last year he didn't get the job, and now he's in the same position. He came back for the interview again. I think that's really good to keep that focus, because if we focus too much on the past, we're going to wallow in it. I like that. I liked his talk of analytics, actually, how you use it as a tool, and that it is just a tool. It's designed to help augment what they're looking at. I think that's going to be very important going forward, as Twitter all over there, everyone's saying, you know, we all have those, all the good teams are starting to use analytics hand in hand. So I think hand in hand is important. I think that we've got guys on the right track. He sounded confident. He sounded really excited about Baker, which I think is great. And how he mentioned his favorite position to work with was quarterback. So I think that's going to be a good thing for Baker as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. On the analytics thing, people are so afraid of analytics, I think, in Cleveland. I think they're kind of afraid that analytics and numbers are going to rule decisions that are made on the field. And I just think people have the wrong impression there. I really do. And right. I think there's two sides to the analytics thing. There's, I think a lot of people think of the draft side of analytics, and and the Spark scores and things like that. That's different. That's different. That's not even what we're talking about here. We're talking about, tendencies and things like that, which is just looking at numbers and what to expect, which why wouldn't you want to know what to expect in certain situations?
Right. I think part of the reason people are afraid of analytics, particularly in Cleveland, is because 2 years ago, we had a analytics group running the show, and we had conflict with Hugh Jackson. So that was part of the problem when it came to the drafting. I think that everyone, again, the whole alignment issue wasn't there. And everyone just, when they hear analytics, they think 1-31 with the teams. But that was a full teardown. That wasn't the whole, we're using these analytics and we're doing this. And I think people are just, when they hear that, it scares them because they think we're just going to tear everything down and go back to it, instead of actually looking at it and going, oh, no, this is something that's a really great tool, particularly on game day, because now we can say, hey, this team likes to run this in these situations. Keep that in mind. And our head coach is going to be like, oh, I like that. He's been even using it beforehand. If you ever listen to, ever read theringer.com, he talked with, I think it's Kevin Clark, about how he looks outside of football for analytics stuff too. So I think he's well versed in this stuff as well. It's not going to be a guy who just tosses that out. It's going to be a guy who actually uses analytics as part of his program.
Right. I think there's so many sides to what's going on right now in Cleveland with the Browns. We have the new coach. They're looking at GMs. We got the draft coming up. We got the draft, free agency, everything. And I think you kind of have to take it one piece at a time and just kind of see how things fit. So, I think most people after today are probably more comfortable with Kevin Stefanski than they were, before the press conference, at least, not saying, oh, we got our guy, because I think most of us have been through this enough that we want to see the results before we just say, oh yeah, he's going to do great, because we just know, the kind of leash that guys have here. Even if he is a great coach, he could start out slow, fans could revolt, and he could be gone. Okay, we know that's what happens here. So, and he could still turn out to be a great coach. It doesn't matter. But I think what's going to be interesting is how Kevin Stefanski fits with the GM, how the GM fits with this analytics group, how free agency goes, how the draft goes, how players react and how players behave under this new, I'll call it a regime. It's going to be a new regime. So,
Right.
we've got all this to look at, and Kevin Stefanski is just one piece of it. So we're what, maybe 25% through, figuring out what this thing's even going to look like.
Right. And Stefanski is the tip of the iceberg. I think it's that people are not trusting the ownership, particularly when you're hearing things like the ownership wants to be involved in some of the discussions and things, and that if some people are mad because it feels like nothing's changing, that ownership's still going to be having their hands in things. And as you and I have talked on Twitter, Browns fans were obsessive with our team to the point that we get frustrated extremely quickly. This past season, we knew the talent that was available and we didn't match it. And it was the Browns fans. We kind of, not that we kind of ran Freddie out of town. It was our big push towards that, I think, which in hindsight, makes sense because he wasn't performing the way we needed him to do. But if Stefanski,
it does now. I mean, I thought the running him out of town was very premature, and
right.
I know I supported him a lot longer than most people did, and probably
Same
longer
here.
than I should have.
Right, same here.
But my goal in all this was to find stability, because it's really the only way the franchise is going to get better is with stability. And
exactly.
My thought was a growing coach. You got to give him a chance, and
yeah.
Freddie really never had a chance. So
no. As soon as the first game started and we didn't win, I feel like it was kind of downhill from there, just because of the expectations. And as I talked with other people, I always felt like it was going to be this coming year that was going to be the big year for us. We could have had a chance to really grow, but Baker regressed so badly in terms of, it was almost like a 180 from where he looked before, as you saw the season go on. The defense got decimated by injuries and suspensions and all sorts of stuff, and it just never gelled together. And so I think if Stefanski can get this team to be gelled and in one mindset going forward, that's going to be great. When we look at everything else is being added around him, I think the key is going to be you need coaches that have been around for quite a while that are going to be aligned with him. Rumor is Wade Phillips as the defensive coordinator would be great. One, because he's a great defensive coordinator. He flexes our defense everywhere. Two, he has tons of coaching and head coach experience. So here's what you need to look at. Here's how you should handle these types of things. Offensively, I think we have a lot of options from young people who may be getting their first shot as an OC to maybe someone who's a little more veteran. Maybe the passing or run coordinator from San Francisco might be a good connection with them because same style of offense that Stefanski, Kubiak, Shanahan system, or rumor is one of the Kubiaks might be coming over. So that's the coaching side, but the GM and stuff, Andrew Berry's being mentioned, the assistant GM with Vikings has been mentioned. The assistant GM of the Colts turned down an interview, unfortunately. I would have really liked to see him, but I think it's going to be it's something where they have to really take this step of being aligned, not just say it. They need to make sure that everybody is agreeing on what's going on and not just saying it and going from there. And Jimmy needs to be patient. That's going to be the big thing. He can't let others sway him. He's got to sit there and say, okay, we're going to stick through this because this is what's we know this is what we can do to grow.
Yeah, that's the main piece that's been missing is that patience factor. And you can kind of give him a pass on Freddie because of, it became apparent at the end that it just wasn't working with Freddie.
Right. I don't see the big thing with the analytics, like everyone's talking about, again, trying to go back to that, but I don't see it being like the end all be all. You have to combine this stuff, and looking at Stefanski's record as an OC, it wasn't a ton, but the plan he put together was one that fit his team. He made everything, as he likes to say, we've got to make the run look like the pass and the pass look like the run. And it made that happen. In his press conference today, he mentioned how, I think it was the safety, was it Harrison Smith he was talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That said it's hard. It was in practice and stuff, it was hard for them to read what was coming. So that's really good for a veteran safety to say that. I think whoever he picks as his coordinators and stuff is going to be, I think that's going to really be the key. He mentioned about calling plays and stuff. Whoever he feels gives them the best chance, whether that's him, whether that's
you could feel everybody holding their breath in the room at that point.
They were like, "Oh no,
don't call plays. You can't call plays because if you do, you're Freddie."
Right, exactly.
Even though some young coaches now are calling plays and doing just fine with it. It's not the kiss of death if he calls plays, guys.
Exactly.
It's just not. It can work. It doesn't mean that's what we want, but you just have to see how things work out. And the other thing he does is he uses the strengths of his players.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to develop his game plan around the players he has and their strengths. So, and I like the fact that he was also talking about the physicality and not getting away from that in this division.
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to try to make this team, something that it's not or something that it shouldn't be to compete in this division, because you have to be able to punch teams in the mouth in this division, and I think that's something that he's going to try to. Well, I'll say keep, because I think the Browns really played that way this season, for in the games that they won.
Exactly, in the Baltimore game.
And that first Baltimore game, even in the first Pittsburgh game, and they really played like an AFC North team, and that's kind of what I thought we were going to be taking away from this season to be building toward next season was, hey, this team didn't win a lot of games, but we've shown that the Browns can play and win against anybody in this division. And I thought that was a major step forward this season. And that's something they'll carry forward even with all the turnover.
Oh, definitely. I don't think there's going to be as much turnover as people are thinking.
Player-wise, maybe not. Yeah.
I don't see that. Like he mentioned, he had met with Odell earlier in that press conference. Him and Jarvis were, down in celebrating a championship, rightfully so. Go have fun. see your team win, but it's one of those things where I think the way it's constructed right now, we need a more supplement than we need to get rid. And so I think it's going to be something where draft wise, I think we're going to be keeping these guys. It's all controllable cap. And I really don't like the idea of getting rid of two top wide receivers just because they're not your guys. That was one thing about Dorsey that bothered me. Even if the player was good, if it wasn't his guy, he was going to get rid of him.
He did let some good players go.
Yeah.
That was pretty upsetting. But, it's going to be interesting. I think that it's my guess that the main guys are all going to be back. The main, I'll call them the main, 5 guys on offense.
I would say the core.
The two, the wide receivers. I think Hunt and Chubb should both be back, and and Baker. So you have those 5 guys, and then I'm sure you have on defense your main guys are going to be back too.
Mm-hmm.
So I say main guys, I'm talking Miles and Richardson and Ogunjobi and our young corners and
right.
And Mac Wilson and we don't know about Joe Schobert, what's going to happen. I mean, he's a free agent now. He can pretty much go wherever he wants, but we'll see. It's going to be interesting because I think that pretty much any GM that comes in, they're going to want to build this thing to suit Stefanski, to suit the defensive coordinator. So there's going to be turnover, but they're not. I don't think this regime is going to give up talent just to get it off the books unless it's really somebody that they see as a problem.
Right. I think our safeties are going to need to be retooled. I like Red Wine, but he's more to be decided. Hunt
I
is
agree.
a restricted free agent, so I would love to keep him. We'll see what happens. Most people are projecting a second round tender for him, and someone might pick him up. Chubb's going to feast in this type of offense. I mean, this offense is tailor made for his running style. So the zone blocking, he's going to be great in that. Defensively, we just need Miles back, and if we do get Wade Phillips like they're saying that we are, I think he's going to excel because he can play standing up on the line. He can do pretty much anything. And Wade defense is a quote unquote 3-4, but it plays more like a 4-3. It morphs. It does all sorts of stuff. He tailors it to his players. So like in Denver, they played more of a 4-3 than they did a 3-4. And that line in the Super Bowl, the Rams, I think, was more of a 3-4 style with the linebackers and letting Donald just destroy.
Oh, yeah, Aaron Donald in the middle. You don't need four guys on the line.
Right, exactly.
All the time. So, yeah, it's just a different situation.
Yeah, and so I think I'm really hoping it's Wade Phillips. But I think if our two corners, like I said, safety, I would love to have Schobert back. I just don't know if it's going to happen just because of money. It might just be something where they say thanks, but no thanks. And they let Taki have more role, or they find somebody in the draft. I think Kirksey's gone too, just because he's so injury prone at this point. But
yeah, they can. I remember from looking earlier. I haven't looked at numbers lately, but I know they can save $7 million on the cap by letting him go this year. So,
right.
I think he's definitely prone to being let go at this point.
Yeah, I love him as a Brown, but it's just I don't think it's in the cards. So
they're going to look at the money.
Yeah,
especially with a slant on analytics now. These guys are going to look at the money. They're going to try to make good decisions. And yeah, you're going to see players that you like leave, but they're going to hopefully make smart decisions on players that they bring in. And my hope is that whoever the GM is, whether it's Andrew Berea or somebody else, that they're going to have, as the football guy, they're going to have the final say over the analytics department. That's kind of what DePodesta said today in his in his portion of the presser was that he doesn't do the scouting. He would just kind of help would reinforce the decision or just say that it's kind of I guess back it up or whatever,
Right. People are
kind of how I took it.
Yeah, they're so afraid that he's like taking over in like the Sashi role or something, and it's going to be his way or the highway. Just like they were like, it's him and McDaniels wouldn't get along, and that wasn't the case. That seemed like those two would have gotten along pretty well had they hired McDaniels. It's just, I think people are worried because it's again, they don't want full analytics to be running everything. And Barry has a combination of analytics and football acumen. So he's probably going to make that final decision. Will be a collaboration with him and Stefanski, and the department will provide some of that. But DePodesta's job is the chief strategy officer. It is not the chief draft picker or the chief player personnel guy. It's strategy. So overall direction of the franchise and the organization, that's from top down. And yes, you can do that remotely. You don't need to be in the building all the time to do this.
People are making a big deal out of that.
They are. And it's because you have this notion of what a football guy is supposed to be. A head of a personnel is supposed to be there every day working, doing this and this. That just doesn't happen in today's group, particularly for these guys who now, if he's doing day-to-day football operations, I could probably see him moving forward, but I don't think he wants to do that. He wants to be the guy on the outside looking at it from a different angle. And I think that's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see him as that kind of an overseer, kind of like almost like a third party kind of person to give their view on how things are running, and like a quality control kind of guy. That's almost how I see him.
Right. Same here. It's not it's not the guy who's making the final say on football decisions. He's just there to make sure everything's running properly and that analytics is being used in the proper context, not in a terms of this is the be all end all. It has to be this way. So I think it's a good way how they're lining this up. I think we're finally, as some of these people that on Twitter have been writing about and everything, saying, hey, this is how some of the consistently good teams do this. As much as I hate to say Ravens use this stuff, and I don't like the Ravens, but their organization has always been run pretty smoothly. Patriots use analytic department stuff. Eagles credit a lot of their stuff with analytics. So it's one of those things where we got to have that going forward. And I think combining coaching acumen with that is going to be the best path forward, not fully on one side and fully on the other side. A nice blending.
Yeah, I mean, people got scared because the Browns were the first team to really push it out there and say, that Sashi and DePodesta, they were all analytics, and it was combined with Hugh Jackson coming in and with a complete teardown to the studs.
Right.
And you put all that together, so you got a coach who, say what you want about Hugh Jackson. Most guys probably wouldn't have won a whole ton of games with those teams because there wasn't a lot of talent there. They were kind of tanking, and I'm not sticking up for Hugh. He wasn't a good coach.
Right.
But I'm just saying, that's kind of how it was set up. So, you had that and then, and then Sashi making picks and who really wasn't he really wasn't a football guy to be a typical GM. So I think this is really an entirely different setup. But people are going to see DePodesta and kind of still be concerned that, well, he's kind of what did that other stuff.
Right. And you look at the point with the Dolphins this year. The Dolphins deliberately even tank worse than what we did in 2016. And they had just enough good players left on the roster. And they have a good coach who, even with that going on, was cohesive enough, again, to get that team to fight through and get 5 wins. Jackson, while a good coordinator, I don't think is ever a really good head coach. And he's a pure football guy. I don't think he's ever really looked at analytics.
Right.
So you look at that combination. Again, we deliberately tore things down to the studs. And like you said, it's one of those, this would technically be year, 4 of the 5-year rebuild if we were to continue on that way. So I think seeing what players we have brought in now, I'm interested to see how they take that and mold it at this point. But I think this team's in a better position than they were a few years ago. And part of that is due to what we did 2 years ago. Part of that is due to the talent that was brought in through free agency, and our early round drafts from a few years ago. So I'm hoping that, again, football and analytics combining together, it took 2 different extremes to mold together, but it also is dependent upon Jimmy Haslam. How much is he going to sit there and listen to one guy and say, yeah, right, and then listen to another guy and say, oh, yeah, you're right, and then overrule everybody and go, we're going to do this instead. And
that's what cannot happen.
Nope.
That's what cannot happen. That was kind of the one positive that I saw this past season, is that we really didn't hear from Jimmy until the end of the season.
Mm-hmm.
So if he can do that part again after letting guys set this up, that's a positive step.
Right. Someone needs to throw a big party on draft night and distract Jimmy while we make draft picks, so he doesn't.
That would be good.
Run away.
So he's not asking the guy on the street corner or whatever.
Right, exactly. Someone don't even have the TV on. Just keep him distracted during the night. Dee can go watch the draft because she seems more invested in the team sometimes anyway. So get him away from it so that way we can let our front office make the decisions without the owner busting in.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see what other moves are coming with the coordinators, with the GM, and just kind of where the Browns go from here. So it's been really good talking to you, Vince. Is there any final words you want to leave everybody with?
I just say I understand some of the frustration with the fans. I get it that you're super frustrated with hiring a guy who may not have seemed like not a ton of experience and everything, but I think we get the right people in place. I think this is a really good opportunity. Stefanski has a lot of supporters, both from coaches and his former players. So I think this is a really great opportunity for us. I think he's going to be a great coach, and I hope that as we go forward, we can really kick it into high gear this year and make some waves against in the NFL.
I sure hope so. Hey, Vince, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, nice talking to you too. Thank you.
All right, take care. And we're going to welcome Peter Jones into the podcast now. Peter, how are you?
I'm very good, Rod. How are you?
I'm just fine. It's been quite a while since we've talked.
It has, and it's a lot been going on for you and your guys in Cleveland, and a lot generally around the NFL. So yeah, lots to think about, lots to talk about.
Yeah, let's just kick off to get your impressions, kind of just from a little bit of a distance. I know you follow what's going on with the Browns, even though, being a Packers fan, and you really have bigger things going on with the Packers right now, but as we all know, but I just kind of wanted to get your impressions maybe of kind of maybe just the past couple weeks in Cleveland of letting Freddie Kitchens go, John Dorsey leaves, Kevin Stefanski comes in, and and just the talk of restructuring the Browns after the two seasons they've had where they've gone 7-8-1 and 6-10. Just kind of your thoughts on what you see.
Yeah. So I think the thing with Freddie Kitchens, I think that I would imagine that from the kind of Browns fans' perspective, there was probably a split, and I don't know whether it was 50-50, but there'd be a split, I would imagine, of people that wanted to move on from Freddie Kitchens because of the record wasn't so great and what have you, and then probably a huge part of the fan base, or 50% perhaps, or that kind of number of fan base that would want to give him another year at least, because you can't keep changing coaches, because at some point you have to stick with the guy and build with him, and there'll be ups and downs, and B, because of the message it potentially sends to potential futures and future head coaches or future free agents or whatever that are coming up, because who would want to keep going to want to go to a place where your job security wasn't great,
or you get a year pretty much.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I would say the split was probably, and it built near the end of the season, but I would say the split was probably more like 90% let Freddie go, 10% keep him by the end of the season.
And I think from the kind of the outside looking in, that doesn't surprise me. And I think that, again, from the outside looking in, I think it would have surprised me and many others had he retained his job. Mm-hmm. Whether that's the right decision or not, I guess we'll never know. It would concern me from that perspective of, at some point you have to stick with a guy. What happens if, and we'll touch on Kevin Stefanski in a minute, but what happens if he comes in and you have a 6-10 season this year? Do you then move on from him as well? At some point you got to give a guy three seasons or 3 or 4 years, and I know that's difficult because we all want to win now, but at some point you have to do that. I think the bigger surprise for us, and clearly with the kind of Packers connection, was moving on from John Dorsey. That was a real surprise, and I guess that there were internal reasons for that, but from the outside looking in, it just felt like, he was the guy there and would be the guy there for the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years. His record is very good, and as a talent guy, it's excellent, and I think that's the big surprise probably to neutrals, if you like myself.
Yeah, and I think that's what we all thought when John Dorsey came in, and he was here, two seasons?
Yeah.
So, it was a surprise. Freddie, not so much by the end of the season.
Yep.
But you're right. It's just I really don't even know what to say anymore, because I think people feel like, we need to win, but you can't keep resetting the clock every year. So sooner or later, you do have to give somebody a period of time, whether it's 3 years or whatever. We'll just say 3 years to try to build a foundation and to build something here. Even if you don't, think they're the best coach, especially when you're talking about somebody like Kevin Stefanski, who's a first-time head coach, who's probably going to be learning on the job a little bit. He's going to make some mistakes, I'm sure. How hard can you be on these people, and how quick can you be to show them the door when you have to be conscious of the fact that it is going to affect anybody else that you can get in the building? We may never know, but a lot of people wanted Josh McDaniels as the Browns coach. Yep. There's talk that he wanted too much control and that there wasn't a fit and things like this, but maybe his demands were so much just because of the situation with the rapid turnover with the Browns. Maybe if that's not the case, maybe the Browns would be able to land a coach, who either is somebody who's already experienced. Obviously, the Browns, it didn't work out with Mike McCarthy, and they didn't have time to make a run at Rivera. But these are guys that people in Cleveland wanted.
Yeah.
But the reality is, you're probably not going to get a guy like that. Why is a guy going to come in and put his legacy at risk to coach a team where he might get he might be on the hot seat after an 0-2 start?
And I think that's a big issue. And when there are 5 or 6 head coaching vacancies, as there were this year and there are most years, you're absolutely right. So take a Mike McCarthy is a great example. And there'll be people around the NFL, and there'll be Packers fans that have mixed views about Mike McCarthy, but clearly that's a guy that had a level of demand for his services, and if he's sitting there with a potential offer from, let's say, Dallas, as he had, and maybe another team, and Cleveland, unfortunately, just from a job security point of view, he's more likely.
He's not going to pick Cleveland. He's not going to pick the Browns.
Why would that? And that's the real difficulty. And I remember a few years ago, and it's not quite the same, but it was quite a few years ago. It's when Dick Vermeil was coaching the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's a long time ago. That's
been a while.
Yeah. So we're talking about the 80s. But there's an interview with him, and he talks about quarterbacks in Philadelphia. And he was going through a struggle with Ron Jaworski at the time. So I'll go back a few years. He was going through this struggle with Ron Jaworski at the time, and the fans were on his back, wanting him to bench Jaworski and all of that kind of thing. And he just came out and said, for years and years in Philadelphia, the fans have been benching the quarterback.
Yeah.
And they haven't won. and he said, I'm just not going to let the fans bench my quarterback. And I'm not going to do it. And we're going to ride Jaworski as far as he can take us. And of course, he took them to the Super Bowl. They didn't win it, but he took them to the Super Bowl. And whilst
team.
It's not, and whilst it's not quite the same thing, the parallels there. At some point, the ownership, the front office, has to be strong enough to say, we're going to get a guy and this may be the guy, Kevin Stefanski may be the guy that they stick with. That if they go 6-10 or 7-9 in 2020, that there's no talk of him being on the hot seat and all that kind of thing. You have to have a 3 to 4 year plan. I think eventually you just can't keep changing coaches. As for and as for Stefanski, I don't think any of us know whether he's the right guy, whether he's coming into what appears to be quite an interesting situation. There's a lot of talk about analytics and looking at game plans on Friday mornings and all of this stuff, but none of us know whether Stefanski is going to be the right guy. What pleases me, I think, or would please me, is that you've got a guy that has a little bit of history of working with quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Albeit, with one team, with Minnesota, but for a number of years working with quarterbacks and as an offensive coordinator, because I just strongly believe, again from the outside looking in, that one of the biggest criteria for me would have been, I want a guy that can come in and work with Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, definitely.
Because if your colours are tied to the mast, that the Baker Mayfield's your man for the next 5 years or the next decade, hopefully, then you need a guy to come in and work with him. And I think that that Mike McCarthy would have done that. I would be hopeful that Stefanski is that type of guy that can do that. The other thing for me, and this isn't always a popular opinion, but historically, I would be happy that you'd got a guy that was coming from the NFL with NFL experience rather than getting a college guy. And I know that the likes of Urban Meyer's name would have been mentioned, and I can understand people, thinking that's a possibility and may have been a good choice, and absolutely fantastic college coach.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going back a quarter of a century since a college head coach came to the NFL and was successful. Basically Jimmy Johnson, very quickly followed by Barry Switzer, but it was Jimmy Johnson's team.
Right.
And you look at all of the guys, the Nick Sabans and the Lou Holtz and those guys that have tried it in the NFL since then and have headed very quickly back to college. So historically, and there'll always be a guy that I guess is the exception to the rule, but historically over the last quarter of a century, those guys from college don't work out. Even Pete Carroll, he came from USC, but had got previous head coaching experience in the NFL with the Jets before he went to USC and came back to Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
So I personally would have been pleased with that. So I think there's a couple of things going for him. How it will work out, Rod, with all of this talk of the analytics and he's reporting to this person and got to talk about, the game plan with this person. I just don't know, and I suspect.
Yeah, he kind of talked about some of that in his press conference.
Yeah,
somebody asked a question, and people are saying you can't necessarily believe him, but I have to take the coach for what he's saying, and that's not going to happen. I think it's just some people to give him some information on tendencies and things like that. I think people are concerned about Di Podesta having too much control, and we'll just have to see. We'll have to see what happens.
I think that's right. These things tend to work themselves out. As to, and it's almost like any employee in a job. That relationship with their management chain, it works itself out over a period of time. Right. How close does the manager need to be? Will change over time. So I think that's a case of kind of wait and see, and I wouldn't be too concerned about that. I think it's a case of you've got a young up and coming head coach, and hopefully he can work with Baker Mayfield, and I think the Browns could have done a lot worse. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, it really feels that way to me.
It's time to move on. You unfortunately you have to put this year behind you and move into 2020 and see where the draft and free agency and everything takes you. And one thing you can look at with any football team is so many football games are decided by one or two plays.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that difficult to go from 6-10 to 10-6 very quickly.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Even my team, the Packers, this year are something like 9-1 in one-score games.
That's the difference.
Seattle, I think, were 10-1 before this past weekend in one-score games.
Which tells you almost every one of their games was a one-score game.
Yeah,
And that's how the NFL is getting to be. Most games are pretty close.
Yeah. So I think, the ability to turn it round quickly, even without doing without making huge changes, I think that ability to turn it around quickly is always there.
Yeah, and it's becoming more apparent that I think they're making it sound like it's like they're going to try to keep. I mean, certainly the roster is not going to stay intact. Rosters always change, but they seem pretty dedicated to keeping the core of this team together versus looking at like a 3-year plan to kind of get rid of a lot of guys and just kind of start over. So I think a lot of people should be happy about that.
Yeah, and I would again. I'm on the outside looking in, and I'm not as close to it as you and your colleagues are, but you'd look at it and you'd look at Baker Mayfield and you'd look at the receivers and you'd look at Myles Garrett and you'd think there's a core of a good team there.
Yeah. I think that's how everybody feels.
Yeah. So I think it's, unfortunate to say, you have to put this season behind you and move on to 2020 and get behind the guys that are there.
That's right, and there's plenty to do in 2020 with putting a staff together, getting ready for a draft and free agency, and getting playbooks together and everything else. So they need to really be looking forward, and Stefanski seems like he is. Well, he said it. He's ready to work. So that's and where they need to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and of course he's a guy that's featured the run quite a lot in his 1.5 years as Vikings offensive coordinator. So that, when you've got the likes of Nick Chubb, that can only be a good thing as well. Yeah,
and we hope Kareem Hunt's going to be back too.
Yep.
He's a restricted free agent. Yeah. So with both of those guys, they should really be pounding the rock this season. Again, definitely, maybe even more than last season.
Yeah. I think there's plenty to be very upbeat and hopeful about.
Yeah, I agree. Well, you were bringing a topic tonight. You've been doing some research on passer ratings.
Yeah.
And how things have kind of changed there over the years. So why don't you kick us off on that and enlighten me? Because I'll be honest, this is something that's kind of befuddled me here for a while. I know the numbers have changed, and I've never looked at the calculations.
Sure.
And I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, so one of the things that's kind of bothered me to a certain degree, as somebody that as loves the history of the game and what have you, is this calculation of passer rating. And the reason it's bothered me, I guess, is that almost every year now the stat comes out that one of the current quarterbacks is now the NFL's all-time leading passer. And it's measured by this thing called passer rating, which the NFL instituted in 1973. And the idea was originally that they couldn't come up with a way of comparing passes in any particular season. Should the passing leader be the guy that throws for most yards or most touchdowns or highest average yards per play, etc. And they also wanted to come up with a way to try and historically compare quarterbacks it was tended to be easier on other positions. Rushing, you always went by yards, and receiving, you typically went by number of receptions. But for quarterbacks, it was quite hard. So they came up with this system in '73, the passer rating system, which was based on 4 criteria: completion percentage, average yards per attempt, touchdown percentage, and interception percentage. And those numbers got converted into points, and there's quite a complex calculation. And basically the average passer back in 1973 was getting a passer rating of around the 65 mark. And that was kind of their basis, that so somebody that was scoring around 65 in passer rating would be kind of in the middle of the pack of the league, and somebody that was getting higher than that would obviously be at the top end, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
The difficulty we now have is, 45 or so years later, is that they've changed all the rules around the passing game. So back then, receivers could be hit all the way down the field. So there was none of this. You can't touch a receiver after 5 yards.
Yeah.
The ability to pass block was restricted back in 1973. So they couldn't even extend their arms to pass block. So there's all kinds of things, even to the point where, Lester Hayes and his stickum. So, any pass that went anywhere near him, he seemed to intercept. So almost every year there's been changes to the rules that have, in essence, made it easier for quarterbacks to put up bigger numbers. Even all of the safety stuff that they've done in the league, lots of it's been around. It was 2 steps before you could hit the quarterback after he's released the ball. Now it's 1 step. You can't hit the quarterback high, you can't hit the quarterback low. It's almost to the point where you can't breathe anywhere near the quarterback, and it's roughing the passer.
Yeah.
So, to cut a long story short, that average of around about 65 passer rating score in 1973. By the end of last season, the average was 93. So nearly half as much again was the average score. So in essence, what we're saying is that a quarterback that was getting a passer rating of 65 in 1973. So let's take who would have been active then. Say a Terry Bradshaw was playing, then scored a 65. That's the equivalent of somebody scoring a 93 this season, which is, I don't know off the top of my head. That's kind of the number I think that Aaron Rodgers got, for example, this year.
Okay.
So if you then kind of look at that historically and say, let me take one of the greatest passers who ever played the game, in my opinion, and happens to be a Cleveland Brown. We look at Otto Graham. So his passer rating was 78.2 in his NFL career. Now let me compare that to let's say Aaron Rodgers, who's the all-time leader right now. His number is 103.1. And just on the basis of those 2 numbers, it looks like Aaron Rodgers is significantly a more efficient quarterback than Otto Graham ever was. He's 25 points higher.
Yeah.
But when you look at that historically, Otto Graham's 78 was compared with the NFL average at his time was 56. So he's actually nearly 40% higher than the average at the time that he played. If you then look at Aaron Rodgers' number, he's 103.1. The NFL average across his career is 85. So he's 20% higher than the NFL average in his career. So looking at just the pure number, the 103 compared to 78, doesn't tell you the full story of what's going on. You have to era adjust those numbers to get the real picture. So it's something that I've been working on. I'm continue to work on, and it's something that I'm going to submit to the Pro Football Hall of Fame when I've finished doing this piece of work, because I think it's important, because I don't think we're getting the real historical perspective of what's going on with quarterbacks of today as compared to those guys from the past.
So you're going through and doing this for a lot of quarterbacks or Hall of Fame quarterbacks, or
So I started with doing the Hall of Fame quarterbacks, and then started looking at quarterbacks from particular franchises. So obviously, with my Packers hat on, I started looking at the Packers ones. Mm-hmm. But I've also got a couple here, for example, just as an example that would kind of be closer to home for you, Rod. So if we look at Bernie Kosar, mm-hmm. So during his career, his passer rating was 81.8 in his career. But the NFL average across the whole of his career was only 75. So he sits at 8% above what the average score was in his career. Brian Sipe actually also, he sits at 8.4% above the NFL average at the time of his career. And those two numbers, the 8% doesn't sound very much until you start comparing it to, say, let's say Troy Aikman. So Troy Aikman across his career was 6% above, actually 5.7% above the NFL average in his career, and that guy's in the Hall of Fame. Terry Bradshaw was 4.9% above the average. John Elway was 4.9% above the average. So it starts to show a little bit of perspective and a slightly different story to just a pure number that doesn't have any context around it. Yeah. So I've done all of the Hall of Famers since World War II and various others, and it's a process that I'm continuing to go through. And the guys that come out near the top are the guys that actually I would expect to come out near the top. Otto Grahams, Roger Staubachs, Joe Montana, Steve Young, Y.A. Tittle, Peyton Manning, Johnny Unitas is somewhere in the top 15. The guys that you would expect to come out on top come out on top. And you can argue about the order, and you can argue about whether there's other things that quarterbacks need to take into account for quarterbacks. Absolutely. This doesn't take into account, for example, quarterback rushing yards. Yeah. Doesn't take into account wins, which are really a team stat, not an individual stat. But it certainly starts to put things into more of a historical, context. And so it's no surprise to me, for example, that when the NFL recently did, they've been doing the top 100 of all time, and they put 10 quarterbacks in there. Well, it's no surprise to me that Otto Graham, Johnny Unitas, Roger Staubach, Joe Montana, those guys, Peyton Manning, those guys are in there. Those are the names that I think most of us off the top of our head would expect to see in there. Yeah. And those are the names that come out on top, in the top 10 or 15 when we do this era adjusted passer rating. Rather than, if you don't era adjust it, all of the top passers are the guys playing today. And nobody, much as some of those guys are good players, not suggesting they're not, nobody's will ever convince me that Joe Flacco, for example, was a better quarterback than Otto Graham. Yeah. So yeah, that's fine. It's it's a bit of a pet project of mine, but it's also because I love the history and whatever. It's also something that I just wanted to do to try and get some historical perspective around this thing. So I guess the other part of this is that ESPN about in the mid 2000s created something that they call QBR, quarterback rating, or total quarterback rating as they call it, which takes into account game situations. and also takes into account rushing yards, which the NFL passer rating doesn't. So they tried to get to the situation where, if you threw a game-winning touchdown in the last minute, well, that was more important than a touchdown that you might have thrown when your team's down by 50 points or up by 50 points. And that makes perfect sense. There is some a lot of sense behind what they've tried to do. I guess the difficulty with it is it only goes back to 2006, so you have none of the historical perspective on it. And it's like lots of stats where there's so much of a judgment call in it. So who's to say that a touchdown thrown with 3 minutes left in the game is more important than one that was thrown with 11 minutes left in the game, or that a third and 8 at this stage of the game was more important than a 2nd and 7 at that stage of the game. There's a lot of subjectivity in it.
Yeah, it's a little too subjective, I would say.
Yeah. But and I think they've tried to do a good job with it, obviously, but it doesn't give me the historical perspective that I really wanted to have. So so it's a pet project of mine that's ongoing. I'm going to write a whole paper around it with these numbers and submit them to the Pro Football Hall of Fame if I ever get this thing finished.
Well, it's excellent work. I think it's a great idea. It's got a lot of meaning to it. For me at least, to be able to compare these guys. I get into, I've gotten into a lot of discussions with people about, comparing Autogram to other quarterbacks and that. And all people want to do nowadays, though, is look at how many titles they won, which to me is just silly. I mean, I understand that a quarterback's the most important guy on the team, and he's the one most likely to help the team win or lose that title. But there's a lot of guys on a football team. There's been a lot of great players who just never even got to a title game, and that doesn't mean they weren't great players.
And that's the problem with it. You somehow want to, like you say, there's a bit about the quarterback being the most important player, and therefore there's something in that. Yeah. But you have to be, like you say, you have to be really careful about that because, you can name lots of Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Let's just go off the top of my head: Warren Moon, Jim Kelly, Dan Fouts, Y.A. Tittle, Fran Tarkenton, Sonny Jurgensen. There's loads of them that never won an NFL title. Well, I think Jurgensen won one as a backup, but those guys never won NFL titles. And there's guys that in the Hall of Fame, and I'm not trying to knock anybody at all. They're all great quarterbacks. But if you look at, say, Bob Greasy won 2 titles with Miami in a team that ran the ball 75% of the time.
Yeah.
So how do you compare that to I don't know, let's take, say Brett Favre that won one quarterback won one NFL title, or Aaron Rodgers that's won one NFL title, or Drew Brees that's won one. It's just impossible.
Yeah. Definitely.
So, it's I guess it's like all of these things. It's just another discussion point. But for me, it's about trying to put some context around numbers. That you'll never get the definitive answer.
You'll never get people to agree on a list of who the greatest is, because it is subjective. It just is. You're putting objective numbers down though for people to look at, and you're adding a lot of context and giving people a lot of stuff to think about though. And I think that's great.
And that's really what it's all about. And I guess the other one that I keep starting and putting away and coming back to is sacks. And we've come across this when we talked about Clay Matthews Jr. With the sack totals not officially starting till 1982.
Right.
That's always annoyed me as well. When you talk about whether it's now Bruce Smith and previously, Reggie White or whoever it might be, is the all-time leading sacker, and and those guys are fantastic players. Obviously, don't get me wrong, but Deacon Jones from the 60s, how many sacks did that guy have?
Nobody even knows, right?
Yeah. And yet a lot of those numbers are actually out there. If so, unofficially recorded by the teams themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that's one, like I say, that I've started that purely for the Packers, because we have that exact situation with the Packers where Willie Davis is clearly the Packers all-time leading sacker, but officially has none. So I've started that process for the Packers, and keep putting it away because it's very difficult. But
yeah, I'm sure.
That's one for another day. But so that's kind of my my pet project for the moment is this passer rating thing, and we'll see how that takes us. See where that takes us.
Well, I applaud your work. I think that's excellent. So keep up the good work, and you'll have to keep us posted on how that's going, and hopefully you'll get it all together and get it to the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely, and I guess, Rod, ultimately any list that ends up with Otto Graham at the top of it can't be a bad list.
I would agree, as would I think most all of our listeners. So, all right, Peter, it's been wonderful. It's been great talking to you, and
thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on, and just I think for everybody listening, just move on to 2020 and get behind the new regime, as it were.
It's great advice. This has been the Browns Blitz. We will catch you all next time.